No one in the courtroom expected the three confident young women to stand up that day and defend a man the entire city had already judged. It started like any other case. Quiet whispers, curious glances, the low hum of people waiting for justice to be served. At the center of it all sat an old man, his shoulders slightly bent, his eyes tired but calm. To most people in that room, he was just another accused figure, someone whose past decisions had finally caught up with him. But what no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that his story was deeply tied to three lives sitting just a few rows behind. Those three women weren't just observers. They weren't reporters or lawyers or strangers. They were daughters, not by blood, but by something far stronger. 20 years earlier, their lives had begun in loss. They were just little girls back then, frightened, alone, and forgotten by a world that moved too fast to care. No home, no family, no one to stand up for them. Until one person did. She wasn't rich. She didn't have power. She wasn't even someone people noticed. She was just a poor maid, working long hours in a quiet neighborhood. She cleaned homes that were never hers, cooked meals she rarely got to enjoy, and lived a life that most people would call ordinary or even invisible. But inside her was a strength no one saw coming. When she found those three orphan girls, something changed. Maybe it was the way they held on to each other, scared of being separated. Maybe it was the silence in their eyes, the kind that only comes from losing too much too soon. Whatever it was, she made a choice that would change all their lives forever. She took them in. No big promises. No perfect plan. Just a small home, a tight budget, and a heart that refused to give up on them. Days turned into years. She worked harder than ever, taking extra shifts, skipping meals, hiding her own struggles just to make sure the girls had a chance at a better life. She became their protector, their teacher, their safe place. And in return, they became her reason to keep going. People talked, of course. How can Maid raise three children? She can barely take care of herself. But she never listened, because for her, it wasn't about what she didn't have. It was about what they needed. And somehow, against all odds, those three girls grew up strong, educated, unbreakable. But now, 20 years later, everything was about to be tested, because the man sitting in that courtroom, the one everyone believed was guilty, was the same person who had once changed their lives in a way no one understood. And just as the judge was about to speak, one of the women stood up. Her voice was steady. "Your Honor, we need to tell the truth." The room fell silent, because what they were about to reveal wouldn't just change the case. It would change everything people thought they knew about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The judge paused, his hand hovering over the file, as every eye in the courtroom shifted toward her. Even the old man slowly lifted his gaze, as if he hadn't expected anyone to speak for him. The silence stretched, heavy and uncertain, until the judge finally nodded. "Go ahead," he said. The woman took a step forward, her voice calm but carrying something deeper, years of memories, pain, and truth waiting to be heard. Her name was Sarah, the eldest of the three. The two women beside her stood close, their presence steady, like they had faced storms together before. "Before this case continues," she said, "you need to know who he really is and what he did for us." A quiet murmur spread through the room. The prosecutor frowned, clearly annoyed, while a few people leaned in, sensing that this was no ordinary defense. Sarah glanced back at her sisters for a brief moment, then looked straight at the judge again. "We didn't just come here to speak," she added softly. "We came here because the truth has been hidden for too long." Her words hung in the air, and slowly, the past began to unfold. 20 years ago, life for those three girls was nothing but survival. The small house they lived in with the maid, whom they called Amy, was barely enough to keep them sheltered. The roof leaked during rain, winters were cold, and some nights dinner was just bread and tea. But even in those moments, Amy never let them feel alone. What the girls didn't understand back then was how she managed it all. There were days she would come home late, exhausted, her hands rough from work, her smile still somehow gentle. And sometimes, without explanation, there would be extra food on the table, or school fees quietly paid just before deadlines passed. As children, they didn't question it. They believed in her completely. But as they grew older, Small things began to feel different. Strangers would occasionally visit, speaking to Amy in hushed tones. Sometimes she would leave in a hurry, asking the girls to stay inside no matter what. And once, Sarah remembered waking up in the middle of the night to see Amy sitting alone, holding an envelope, tears silently falling down her face. When Sarah had asked her about it the next morning, Amy simply smiled and said, "Some burdens are easier to carry alone." It didn't make sense back then. But now, standing in that courtroom, it meant everything. Sarah took a slow breath. "We thought she was doing everything by herself," she said. "We thought she was our only support." She paused, her eyes briefly moving toward the old man, sitting quietly across the room. But we were wrong. The courtroom grew even more still. "There was someone else," she continued. "Someone who made sure we never went hungry. Someone who protected us from things we didn't even know were dangers." A lawyer shifted in his seat. The judge leaned forward slightly. Sarah's voice softened. "And that someone is the man sitting right there." Gasps broke out across the room. The old man didn't react, but his eyes lowered again, as if he had spent years avoiding this very moment. One of Sarah's sisters stepped forward now, her voice filled with emotion. "We didn't even know his name for years," she said. "We just knew that whenever things got too hard, somehow, help would come." Another pause, another layer of truth waiting to be uncovered. "But what we discovered later," Sarah added, her voice tightening slightly, "was that the help we received came at a cost he never told us about." The tension in the room shifted, because now, this wasn't just a story of kindness. It was starting to sound like a secret. And whatever that secret was, it was the reason this man was now sitting in court, waiting to be judged. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like a place where something long buried was slowly being brought to light, piece by piece. People who had come expecting a simple case now sat frozen, trying to understand how a quiet old man and 3 successful young women could be connected by a secret that stretched back 2 decades. The prosecutor stood up, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, with respect, this is not relevant to charges. We are here to discuss facts, not emotional stories." But Sarah didn't sit down. "This is not just a story," she replied, her voice steady. "This is the reason he is here today." That caught the judge's attention. He gestured for her to continue. Sarah nodded, then spoke more slowly, choosing her words carefully. "We grew up believing we were poor, struggling, and alone except for our mother. But as we got older, we started noticing patterns. Every time something went wrong, someone fixed it quietly. School problems, health issues, even situations we didn't fully understand, they were handled before they could harm us." Her younger sister, Amina, stepped in. "I remember one day clearly," she said. "I was about to be sent home from school because our fees were overdue. I was standing outside the office, scared and embarrassed. Then suddenly, the principal called me back in and said everything had been taken care of. No explanation, no receipt, just solved." The third sister, Hira, added softly, "It kept happening like that, too many times to be coincidence." The judge leaned back, thoughtful. "And when did you discover his identity?" There was a brief silence. "Years later," Sarah said, "after we had grown up, after we had started building our own lives." She glanced toward the old man again, as if remembering the moment everything changed. It was after Amy fell sick. The words seemed to shift the energy in the room. Even the old man's hands tightened slightly. "She never told us how serious it was," Amina said quietly. "She kept saying it was just exhaustion. But one night, she couldn't hide it anymore." Sarah continued, her voice softer now. "We rushed her to the hospital. That was the first time we saw him." A ripple of curiosity passed through the courtroom. "He wasn't introduced as family," Hira explained. "He didn't act like someone important. He stood at a distance, speaking to doctors, making calls, arranging everything. We thought he was just someone from the hospital staff. But he wasn't," Sarah said. The prosecutor crossed his arms. "And you're saying this man paid for everything?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "But that's only part of it." She hesitated, as if the next part was harder to say. When Amy realized we had seen him, she tried to dismiss it. She told us not to ask questions. But for the first time in our lives, we didn't listen. The courtroom stayed completely silent. We started digging. Amina said, we looked through old papers, asked neighbors, followed small clues we had ignored as children. And what we found, Hira added, her voice tightening, didn't just surprise us, it scared us. The judge's expression grew more serious. Scared you? In what way? Sarah took a deep breath. Because the man who had been helping us all those years wasn't just some kind stranger. She paused, her eyes fixed on the old man. He was connected to things we didn't understand. Things that explained why his help was always hidden, why Amy never wanted us to ask questions, and why, even now, he refuses to defend himself. The old man remained silent, but there was something heavier in his expression now, like the weight of years catching up to him. Sarah's voice dropped slightly. He didn't just protect us, she said. He kept us away from something that followed him. A faint murmur spread again. And now, Amina added, her hands trembling slightly, that same past is a reason he's sitting here today. The tension thickened, because whatever truth they were revealing, it wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It was about a hidden life, and a past that refused to stay buried. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier, with every word spoken. What had started as a simple case had now turned into something no one could fully understand yet. The judge's expression had changed. The lawyers were no longer confident, and the people watching could sense that something big was about to come out. Sarah stood still for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say what came next. Her sisters stayed close, their presence steady, but their eyes carried the same tension. Across the room, the old man finally looked up again, not at the judge, not at the lawyers, but at them. There was something in that look, not fear, not regret, but a quiet warning, as if he was asking them to stop. But they didn't. Your Honor, Sarah said softly, we didn't understand everything at first. We only knew that the man who helped raise us had been hiding his role all these years. But when we started digging deeper, we realized why. The prosecutor shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. This is turning into speculation. It's not, Amina interrupted, her voice firmer now. We brought proof. That single sentence changed everything. A faint stir moved through the courtroom as Sarah reached into her bag. She pulled out a thin file, old, slightly worn, like it had been hidden for years. For a second, she just held it, her fingers tightening around the edges. This, she said, is what Amy tried to keep from us. The old man's eyes closed briefly. The judge leaned forward. What is in that file? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the old man again, as if giving him one last chance to speak. He didn't. The silence between them said more than words ever could, so she turned back. Records, she said. Payments, names, dates, places. The prosecutor quickly stood up. Your Honor, I request that any documents be reviewed properly before. These documents are the reason he never defended himself, Hira said, her voice shaking but clear. Because if he speaks, everything comes out. That hit the room like a wave. The judge's tone grew more serious. Are you suggesting there is more to this case than what has been presented? Yes, Sarah answered without hesitation. A lot more. She slowly opened the file. You see a man accused of wrongdoing, she continued. But what you don't see is the life he lived before this, the choices he made, and the people he was trying to protect. A deep silence followed. Years ago, she said, he was part of something powerful. Not a family, not a normal job. Something bigger. Something that controlled people, money, and decisions behind the scenes. A murmur spread again, louder this time. And when he left that life, Amina added, he didn't just walk away. Hira's voice dropped. He became a target. The old man lowered his head again. Sarah's grip on the file tightened. He used everything he had to stay hidden, she said. And at the same time, he made sure we were safe. That's why the help was always secret. That's why Amy never let us ask questions. Because if we knew, we could have been in danger too. The prosecutor shook his head. This is a serious claim. If you're implying criminal connections, "We're not implying," Sarah said quietly. "We're explaining." The tension reached a new level. "Because the charges against him today," she continued, "are not what they seem." The judge's voice was firm now. "Then explain it." Sarah took a slow breath. "They say he did something wrong recently," she said. "But what if that wasn't the full story? What if what he did was to stop something from happening again?" A heavy pause filled the room. "Something from his past." Amina added, "Something dangerous," Hira whispered. Sarah looked down at the file in her hands, then back up, "And the proof of that," she said slowly, "is right here." Every eye in the courtroom locked onto that file. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor went silent. Even the guards near the door seemed frozen. And for the first time, the old man spoke, his voice low, almost breaking. "Don't open it." The word sent a chill through the room. But Sarah didn't move, because whatever was inside that file wasn't just evidence. It was the truth. And once it came out, there would be no turning back. Sarah froze for just a second after hearing his voice. It wasn't loud, but it carried something deeper than fear. It sounded like someone who had already lost too much and didn't want others to pay the price for it. The courtroom held its breath. "Why?" the judge asked, his tone sharper now. "If this file contains the truth, why shouldn't it be opened?" The old man didn't answer immediately. His hands slowly tightened against the table in front of him. For the first time, there was visible tension in him. "Because this case won't stay in this room," he said quietly. "It never does." A strange silence followed. Sarah's heart was racing, but she didn't step back. "We've already come this far," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "We deserve to know everything. He deserves a fair chance." Amina nodded beside her. "We're not children anymore. We can face the truth." Hira added softly, "We've been living in the shadow of it our whole lives." The judge looked between them and the old man, clearly weighing something bigger than just legal procedure now. "If there's more to this story," he said, "then it needs to come out. But I will not allow unnecessary risk inside this courtroom." "Explain what you mean." The old man let out a slow breath, his eyes moving across the room, over the people, the doors, even the windows, like he was searching for something no one else could see. "That file," he said, "doesn't just have my past in it. It has names, people who don't like being remembered." The words settled heavily. The prosecutor tried to regain control. "Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to confuse the court with vague claims and—" "Then why are you nervous?" Sarah cut in, her eyes suddenly locking onto him. The room shifted again. The prosecutor stiffened. "I'm not nervous." Sarah took a small step forward. "Then you won't mind if we share what's inside." For the first time, the prosecutor didn't respond right away. It was subtle, but it was enough. A ripple of suspicion moved through the courtroom. Sarah slowly opened the file, her fingers brushing over old papers, documents filled with dates, signatures, and symbols she didn't fully understand until recently. She pulled out one page and held it up. "These are transaction records," she said. "Old ones, from years ago, the same years we were being supported." The judge signaled for the document to be brought forward. As it was handed over, his expression grew more focused. "And these names?" he asked. Sarah swallowed. "That's where it changes," she said. Amina stepped in, her voice firmer now. "We thought we would find people from his past, but instead, we found names that still exist in the present." The tension spiked. Hira added quietly, "People with influence, people with power." The old man closed his eyes again. "Stop," he said, this time more firmly. "You don't understand what you're doing." But Sarah didn't stop. "Some of those names," she continued, "are connected to the very system handling this case." A sudden stillness filled the room. The judge looked up sharply. The prosecutor's face changed, just for a second, but enough. Sarah's voice lowered, each word landing heavier than the last. "And one of those names," she said, her eyes fixed ahead, "is sitting in this courtroom right now." A loud murmur broke out. The guard straightened. The judge struck the gavel, calling for order, but even he couldn't hide the shift in his expression. "Identify who you're referring to," he demanded. Sarah didn't speak immediately. Her gaze slowly moved, not toward the old man this time, but across the room, past the spectators, past the doors. And then it stopped. The moment stretched, because whoever she was about to point at wasn't just part of the past. They were still part of the present. And whatever role they played could change this entire case in an instant. Sarah's hand trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed locked in one direction. The entire courtroom followed her gaze, tension rising with every second that passed. And then she spoke. Him. Her finger pointed straight at the prosecutor. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the room itself refused to process what had just happened. The prosecutor stood frozen, his expression caught between disbelief and something far more telling. That's impossible, he said quickly, but his voice didn't carry the same confidence as before. This is a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, Sarah interrupted. It's a connection. The judge's face hardened. Order, he said firmly, though his eyes were now fixed on the prosecutor. Explain yourself. I don't need to explain anything, the prosecutor replied, but he avoided looking directly at Sarah. These claims are baseless. Amina stepped forward, her voice steady. Then why is your name in the records? Not once, but multiple times. The courtroom erupted into whispers again. The judge raised his hand. Bring those documents here. As the papers were passed forward, the silence grew deeper. Every movement felt louder, every breath more noticeable. The judge scanned a page, then another, his expression shifting from focus to concern. These records, he said slowly, show repeated financial links, not recent ones, but ongoing over the years. The prosecutor finally looked at him. That doesn't prove anything illegal. No, Sarah said softly, but it proves something was hidden. The old man, who had remained quiet until now, slowly stood up. The guards moved slightly, unsure whether to intervene, but he didn't resist. He just stood there, facing the judge. I'll speak, he said. The room went completely silent. For years, I stayed quiet because I believed it would protect them, he continued, glancing briefly at the three women. But silence only protects the truth for so long. He took a slow breath. I was part of a network once. Not something visible, not something people talk about openly. It controlled opportunities, money, decisions, and people. When I realized what was becoming, I left, but leaving didn't erase my connection to it. The judge listened closely. I knew they would come after me eventually, the old man said. So I stayed hidden. I used what I had left to help those who needed it most, including these girls. But I also knew one day my past would return. Sarah's voice softened. And it did. He nodded. The charges against me now, he said, are tied to something I stopped. A decision I made recently to prevent that same network from harming others again. I broke their trust, and this is the result. The courtroom felt different now, not just tense, but aware. The judge turned toward the prosecutor. Is there any response to this? For the first time, the prosecutor hesitated. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. That silence said more than anything else. The judge leaned back, clearly processing everything. Given the new evidence and testimony, he said, this court cannot proceed as if this is a simple case. There are deeper matters here that require full investigation. A wave of relief moved through the room, especially among the three women. It wasn't the end yet, but it was a shift. The truth was finally being seen. The old man slowly sat back down, his shoulders lighter than before. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with something between gratitude and pain. You should have told us, she whispered. He gave a faint, tired smile. I wanted you to live without fear. For a moment, it felt like everything had settled. But then, Your Honor, a voice came from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. A man stepped forward. Someone no one had noticed before. He wasn't in uniform, not part of the legal team, just there. There's something else you need to see, he said calmly. The judge frowned. And who are you? The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he held up a small envelope. This case isn't just about the past, he said. It's about what's happening right now. A strange tension filled the room again. Sarah's heart dropped. What do you mean? She asked. The man looked straight at her, then at the old man. "Those records you found," he said, "they're incomplete." A cold silence spread. "Because the network he left," the man continued, "never actually let him go." The old man's expression changed instantly. "And everything happening today," the man added quietly, "was planned." The room froze once more, because just when it felt like the truth had come out, a deeper, more dangerous truth had just begun. The courtroom held its breath again, but this time the fear felt different. It wasn't confusion anymore, it was realization. The man from the back stepped closer, placing the envelope on the table. "I'm not here to accuse," he said calmly. "I'm here because this doesn't end unless everything is brought into the open." The judge signaled for the envelope to be handed over. Inside were updated records, recent dates, active transactions, and quiet movements that connected the past and present. The same network the old man had tried to leave behind was still operating, still influencing lives, still hiding in plain sight. The judge's expression turned firm. "This court will not ignore this," he said. "All related records will be reviewed, and any individual connected to this network will be investigated under the law." The prosecutor lowered his head. This time, there was no argument. The old man sat still, but something in his face changed. For the first time, it didn't look like he was carrying everything alone. Sarah stepped forward again, her voice softer now. "So all these years, you weren't just helping us," she said. "You were protecting us from something bigger." He nodded slowly. "I made choices I'm not proud of," he admitted. "But when I saw what it could do to innocent lives, I couldn't stay part of it." Amina wiped her tears. "You gave us everything," she said, "even when it cost you your own peace." Hira added quietly, "And you never asked for anything in return." The room, once full of judgment, now felt filled with understanding. The judge spoke again. "Based on everything presented, this case will be suspended while a full investigation takes place. Until then, the accused will not be treated as guilty, but as a key witness." A quiet wave of relief passed through the courtroom. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, as if finally allowing himself to rest. When he opened them again, he looked at the three women, not as children he once protected, but as strong individuals who had chosen to stand for him when it mattered most. "You didn't have to do this," he said. Sarah gave a small, emotional smile. "You did for us first." The tension that had followed them for years didn't disappear instantly, but it loosened. The truth was no longer hidden, and that alone changed everything. As people slowly began to leave the courtroom, whispers filled the air, not of judgment, but of a powerful story. A poor maid who raised 3 orphan girls with nothing but love and sacrifice. A hidden protector who carried a dangerous past, but chose to protect innocent lives. And 3 daughters who walked into court not just to defend a man, but to reveal the truth. Outside, the sunlight felt different. The world hadn't changed overnight, and the investigation was far from over. But something important had shifted. The fear of silence had been replaced with the strength of truth. Sarah looked back once more before leaving. For years, their story had been about survival. Now it was about courage, because in the end, it wasn't wealth, power, or status that defined them. It was loyalty. It was sacrifice. And it was the quiet strength of a family that chose each other, even when the world stood against them.